In this video, we will be covering Chapter 3, Sections 5 and 6. An if statement can be inside another if statement to form a nested if statement. The if and if-else statements can be nested inside any legal Java statement, including another if or if-else statement. There's no limit to the depth of nesting, but understand that the more levels of nesting, the more difficult it becomes to understand the code. Consider the code on this slide. The if j greater than k statement is nested inside the if I greater than k statement. This will implement multiple alternatives. As shown in this code, when both conditions are true, both I and j are greater than k. Consider the placement of the else statement. The else statement is attached to the condition I greater than k. So the else statement is only executed if I is less than k. Likewise, the if statement with the condition j greater than k is only executed if I is greater than k. Can you draw the flowchart for this nested if statement? If we want to print a letter grade according to the student's score, we'll need to use a multi-way if statement. This slide shows two equivalent ways to code the multi-way if statement. It is important to understand that the order of the conditional expressions matter and can greatly change the outcome of this program. It is important that we first test for score greater than or equal to 90, followed by score greater than or equal to 80, etc. The only time we will reach the print statement to print an F is if all other conditions that come before it are false. Pause this video and see if you can draw the corresponding flowchart. This is the flowchart for the grading example in the previous slide. How did you do? Pause this video and refer to your online textbook now for a trace of the code. Now that we've been introduced to the if statement, the if-else statement, and the multi-way if statement, let's take some time to consider some common errors. Hopefully, alerting you to some of the most common errors will help you to avoid spending countless hours in debugging. We'll also consider two common pitfalls. The first common error is forgetting to put the necessary braces when the block contains more than a single statement. Although braces can be omitted if the block of code contains a single statement, this is not preferred because it can cause errors if the code is modified to add new statements to the block. Another common error is adding a semicolon at the end of an if clause after the closing parenthesis. This is easily avoided using the end-of-line block style that we covered in Chapter 1. When testing if a Boolean variable or a Boolean constant is true, we do not need to employ the equivalence operator, the double equal sign. We simply need to assert the variable or constant as it holds a value true or false. While these if statements are equivalent, the code on the right in block B is much cleaner. It is important to understand that the else clause matches the most recent if clause in the same block. Remember that braces denote the blocks. In this example, nothing will be printed because the else block is only executed if I is greater than j. When we want an else clause to match a previous if clause, we must use braces wisely. This segment of code will only print A if both I is greater than j and I is greater than K is true. It will only print B if I greater than J is false. That is to say, I is less than or equal to J. Floating point numbers have a limited precision. Therefore, calculations involving floating point numbers can introduce round-off errors. This makes testing the equality of a floating point number unreliable. We would expect the Boolean expression in the print line statement to evaluate to true, but due to round-off errors, it evaluates to false. If we need to test the equivalence of two floating point numbers, we use a threshold value, epsilon, to compare if the two are close enough. We set epsilon to a very small, tolerable error and introduce the if statement to test if the absolute value is within epsilon of the anticipated value. We should strive to keep our code both clean and understandable. Here is an example of an equivalent code blocks, but the code on the right in box B is much cleaner. The computer evaluates the Boolean expression on the right of the equal sign, number mod 2 is equivalent to 0, and stores the result, either true or false, in the Boolean value even. Another pitfall is that of duplicate or redundant code. When we see the exact code in multiple locations in our program, it warrants further inspection to determine if the code can be factored and placed in a single location. In this example, we see that the print line statement is duplicated in both the if and else blocks. It's not an error, but it's poor coding. It is much better to replace the code in the example A with that in example B, which has only a single print line statement that is executed after the completion of the if-else statement.